When you think of the 1920s, what comes to mind? Flappers, jazz, speakeasies, Model T Fords, a golden age of economic boom, bootleg liquor, a booming industry? Well, there's truth in the glamour, but there's also far more to the story. The 1920s weren't just a decade of affluence and frivolous spending. They were a period of dramatic social, economic, and political transformation in the United States. In today's video, we're diving into the truth behind the Roaring Twenties. From booming businesses to revolutionary technology, from radios and movie palaces to advertising and consumer culture. This is how America became modern. Let's get started. The 1920s marked a turning point in American life. While the decade is remembered for its prosperity, the real story is one of transformation. After a brief post war slump, the economy rebounded strongly by 1922 and surged ahead for the rest of the decade. America was hitting new peaks of prosperity daily. With more money and more leisure time, Americans indulged in consumer fancies like never before. A rapidly growing advertising industry stroked the appetites of a rising middle class. This wasn't just about buying more, it was about a new way of life, and a new kind of government helped shape it. As the progressive era faded, Americans grew more comfortable with the idea of large, successful businesses. Department stores offered convenience and low prices. The automobile delivered mobility and status. Republican presidents Warren Harding, Calvin Coolidge, and Herbert Hoover championed pro business policies. They staffed their administrations with like minded advisors and embraced the idea that what was good for business was good for America. Federal agencies like the Federal Trade Commission, once meant to regulate business, now worked hand in hand with industry. Meanwhile, labor unions fell out of favor, particularly when they disrupted key industries. Federal troops crushed strikes in steel, coal, and rail. Even the Supreme Court got involved, overturning minimum wage laws for women and nullifying child labor restrictions. Nowhere was the change more dramatic than in industry and technology. The 1920s saw manufacturing output rise by over 60%. Per capita income grew by a third, and GNP expanded by 4.2% annually. One word explains much of this growth: technology. The single greatest technological force of the decade was the automobile. Though cars had existed since the 1890s, Henry Ford changed everything. His Model T, launched in 1908, became affordable by 1924, just $290. Ford promised to democratize the automobile, and he did. By 1929, there were 26.5 million registered cars, one for every five Americans. Cars didn't just change how people traveled, they reshaped entire industries. Steel, rubber, glass, tools, oil, gas stations, and road construction all flourished. Cars also encouraged suburban living and triggered a housing boom that would echo all the way into the 1950s. Other sectors expanded rapidly too, especially those powered by electricity and innovation. Plastics, synthetic fibers like nylon, aluminum, magnesium, and electric power all grew. Telephones became increasingly common. By the late 1930s, the United States had 25 million phones. That's about one for every six people. For many Americans, modern life now meant being more connected. If the car revolutionized mobility, radio and movies revolutionized American culture. Radio took off after 1920 when WWJ in Detroit and KDKA in Pittsburgh began broadcasting news and programs. By 1925, 2 million radio sets were in American homes. By the end of the decade, radio was everywhere. Families gathered around to listen, and a shared national culture began to take shape. Cinema was just as powerful. Moving pictures debuted in 1896, and by 1908, there were nearly 10,000 movie theaters nationwide. Hollywood took over production, producing cowboy westerns and comedies, especially those of Charlie Chaplin, who turned slapstick into social commentary. In 1927, the jazz singer introduced sound to movies, launching the era of talkies. By 1930, 100 million Americans saw films weekly, more than double the number in 1922. However, Hollywood remains segregated. Interracial couples were banned on screen, and white actors often played black characters in blackface. Yet, black film pioneer Oscar Michaud defied the norm, producing 39 films with black casts shown in segregated theaters. All this prosperity changed how Americans shopped and lived. Incomes rose faster than the cost of living. For the first time, many people had more disposable income than ever before, and they spent it. Electric refrigerators, washing machines, vacuum cleaners, and wristwatches became common. Women bought cosmetics and mass produced fashion. And of course, the automobile topped everyone's wish list. As homes gained electric power, the household appliance market boomed. Stores began offering credit and installment plans. A housewife could now take home a stove with a small down payment and just pay monthly. The logic was simple: more consumer spending meant more factory production, and more factory production meant more profit, and more profit meant more jobs. Businessmen, once derided as Gilded Age robber barons, were now held as heroes of progress. None of this consumer revolution would have happened without the rise of advertising. Building on the techniques used in wartime propaganda, 1920s advertising became a powerful cultural force. No longer did they just give information, ads sold lifestyles. They created desires, they shaped identities, and they turned products into symbols. This new consumer culture helped unify the nation. Urban and rural Americans alike were exposed to the same values and the same dreams. The 1920s gave us the foundations of modern America: cars, movies, mass media, advertising, and suburbia. It was a decade of dazzling prosperity and rapid change. But beneath the glitz, there were contradictions between rich and poor, business and labor, racial progress and segregation. As we'll see in future videos, this high flying decade couldn't last forever. The 1920s roared, but they would soon end with a crash. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.